The Prime Minister stood there and assured members that there is no military path to victory for the Taliban. And then he went on to say, Mr. Speaker, I do not think that the Taliban are capable of victory by military means. The British government were wrong and complacent, the Prime Minister was wrong and complacent, and when he wasn't rewriting history, the Prime Minister was displaying the same appalling judgment and complacency last week. Mr. Speaker, the response of the British ambassador to the Taliban arriving at the gates of Kabul was to personally process the paperwork for those that needed to flee. He is still there, and we thank him and his staff. The Prime Minister's response to the Taliban arriving at the gates of Kabul was to go on holiday. No sense of the gravity of the situation, not leadership to drive international efforts on the evacuation. The Foreign Secretary shakes his head. Mr. Speaker, what would I do differently? I wouldn't stay on holiday whilst Kabul was falling. And there are numerous examples of those leaders on both sides of the House who've come back immediately in a time of crisis. The Foreign Secretary stayed on his... He's shouting now. He's shouting now. Silent. Mr.
Order. The Prime Minister was heard, and I want to hear the Leader of the Opposition. I don't want people to shout, you may disagree, but you'll also may wish to catch my eye. Don't ruin that chance. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary shouts now, but he stayed on holiday while our mission in Afghanistan was disintegrating. Mr. Speaker, he didn't even speak to ambassadors in the region as Kabul fell to the Taliban. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. You cannot coordinate an international response from the beach. A dereliction of duty by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, a government totally unprepared for the scenario that it had 18 months to prepare for. Mr. Speaker, it's one thing for people to lose trust in the Prime Minister at home, but when the trust in the word of our Prime Minister is questioned abroad, there are serious consequences for our safety and security at home. Mr. Speaker, in one moment, recent events in Afghanistan shame the West. Not just the scenes of chaos, but what it says about our abandonment of the Afghan people. For those brave people around the world, living under regimes paying scant regard to human rights, but resisting those regimes in pursuit of democracy, equality and individual freedom. What does this say to them? What does this retreat from freedom signal to those prepared to stand up for it? What does this surrender to extremism mean for those prepared to face it down? And what does it mean for those nations who support an international rules-based system when we hand over power to those who recognise no rules at all? That is the challenge of our time. Mr. Speaker, the British and Afghan people will have to live with the consequences of the Prime Minister's failure. We have fought for 20 years to rid Afghanistan of terror, terror which threatens our security here in Britain and liberty in Afghanistan. The Taliban are back in control. The Prime Minister has no plan how to handle the situation, just as he had no plan to prevent it. What we've won through 20 years of sacrifice could all be lost. That is the cost, Mr. Speaker, of careless leadership. Thank you.